Hello, and welcome to Voices from the Institute for Human Rights and Business. In this podcast, you'll hear about people working to make respect for human rights part of everyday business. I'm Haley St. Dennis. I'm IHRB's head of Just Transitions. Just Transitions being this idea that you can achieve not only a cleaner, greener future through decarbonization, but also a fairer one. And when we talk about just transitions, it's easy to think of big systems like energy, finance, industry. But at its heart, just transitions is about people, their livelihoods, their dignity, and their agency in shaping their own future. So in this episode, you'll hear about Manguben, a salt farmer in Gujarat, India, who learned new skills to operate solar energy equipment. And that might sound quite simple, potentially, but you'll hear how that has been entirely transformational to her and thousands of other farmers. Manguben's story is one of many featured in IHRB's Just Stories project, which is capturing how just transitions are unfolding on the ground around the world, and in particular, the role of business within them. But before we listen to that story, I wanted to speak with one of the people behind how that incredible transition was constructed. Someone whose leadership has shaped what real-time resilience looks like in practice. Reema Nanavaty leads the Self-Employed Women's Association, SEWA, a union of 3.2 million women workers across India's informal economy. And she has spent more than 40 years championing economic self-reliance, collective power, and women's leadership in the green transition. Reema, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and namaste.
Just to kick things right off, you have led SEWA through some enormous shifts, from rebuilding after earthquakes to pioneering these kinds of clean energy enterprises by and for women. And so when you hear this phrase, just transitions, what does it mean to you personally?
I think you asked a very important question, because when we say just transition, for us at SEWA and for our 3.2 million members, therefore, what just transition really means is a transition that helps them secure their livelihoods also while they are transitioning. It brings them dignity and self-respect. It also gives them health security and secure food security as well. A transition that integrates all of these aspects of their lives and livelihoods is a just transition for us. So it's not just a transition of switching over to energy sources, but it is also a transition that helps in securing the livelihoods and the lives as well.
And so obviously 3.2 million members, absolutely enormous number. And we at IHRB have spotlighted a particular trade, salt farming. But of course, SEWA represents many different kinds of trades. So this is very much illustrative of what you do across the board, whether it's agriculture, street vending, waste collection, and many different trades in between. So thinking particularly about the salt story, can you take us back to when SEWA first began thinking about climate transition? What was happening in the lives of those women salt farmers like Manguben, and how did you see that need for change emerge?
Manguben and some 30,000 women salt pan workers like her were really struggling for survival. They were literally living the lives of bonded laborers, as they had to take or borrow money from the traders or the middlemen, go to the desert and live in the desert for 8 to 9 months of the year. And this is the inland rock salt that they produce. This is not the sea salt. And since they had borrowed at the beginning of the season, the terms of repayment were that the trader or the money lender would take away all the salt in return, no matter whether it was 300 tons or 400 tons. So at the end of the season, toiling for 8 or 9 months of the year in the scorching heat and the sandstorms blowing, temperatures going up to 53 or sometimes even 54 degrees centigrade, when just living in the desert becomes next to impossible, these salt pan workers were left with no money. and therefore they were trapped in that vicious cycle of indebtedness. And SEWA tried to provide them with support services. So we brought in healthcare services, we brought mobile ration vans so that the women and their households could have access to better food, not just black tea and millet bread as their food. We brought mobile schools for the children, but yet, the major issue that was trapping them into this indebtedness was how do you relieve them from the clutches of the traders and the middlemen? That was because 75% of the money that they were borrowing went into purchasing diesel oil, as they had to pump out brine from the desert 24 by 7 for almost 3 to 6 months of the year. So they would pump out the brine day and night, and that was taking away all their income. So the challenge ahead of us was that what could be an alternative to these diesel engines. And that's where we thought of just transition, that, how if we brought in solar pumps or wind pumps into the desert, as there's abundant solar light, there are these sandstorms, so the wind energy could also help in pumping out the brine. We did a study that showed that wind pumps may not be that effective, as the wind velocity kept fluctuating, while solar pumps were far more effective. So we piloted with 10 pumps, and we didn't want to take a step which would directly affect adversely the livelihoods of these salt pan workers and therefore their lives. Second was that, a diesel engine would cost maybe Indian rupees 15 or 20,000 rupees, while the investment in buying a solar pump would be around anywhere between 125 to 150,000 rupees. So that was a big investment for the salt pan workers. So we piloted with 10 pumps to see how it really brings about major change in saving of the cost of buying diesel oil. And it showed that the consumption of diesel by having one solar pump came down by almost 50%. That's how we thought that, well, if we could work out a financial architecture where these women were able to borrow from the banks to buy these diesel pumps, then I think their lives would completely change, and it would be a major contribution, towards just transition. And that's how we plunged into the whole program. We were very fortunate that International Finance Corporation, NRDC, came to our support, and we worked out a financial architecture. A private sector bank, Yes Bank, came forward to lend to 200 salt pan workers, seeing excellent repayment, almost 100%. The Bank of Baroda, which was one of our nationalized banks, came forward to lend to 15,000 salt pan workers. And that's how, the journey began.
Absolutely incredible. I might come back to a couple different points you mark in that journey, because what you just explained covers a span of about 10 years. Is that right? From pilot to today?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yes, 10
So
years.
just going back to that pilot phase, even before then, when you first really identified this need, given we're talking about debt bondage that has been in place and perpetuated for generations. In fact, this is a generational kind of migratory artisanal salt farming process. What gave you the confidence that women could lead that change and not just adapt to whatever, might otherwise be dictated by the market or industry or any other innovations or solutions that were identified?
So, Haley, our experience of organizing women workers in the informal economy for the last 50 years shows that women are always willing to take on newer challenges and risks, if you may call it. The second reason which really gave us the confidence that, this would really help was that the pilot really showed that there was a substantial saving, and that would enable the women to repay back. And in 3 years' time, they would start owning a green asset. And our experience of organizing again shows that asset creation is one of the surest ways to fight poverty as well. So, with organizing the salt pan workers, having access to a green asset would definitely then having access to market linkages, having access to support services would enable the women embark on a journey of empowerment, lift them out of poverty, and earn a life of dignity and self respect.
Incredible. And for the business practitioners leading, many of whom will have commitments to the Sustainable Development Goals, to eradication of poverty, that is such a clear demonstration of the way in which you can directly harness this transition to deliver that outcome in terms of the equity
I
and
can
inequality
fully
crisis.
vouch for it, Haley, because the pilot of 200 pumps, where the Yes Bank, which is a private sector bank, worked with us, and we had 100% repayment, absolutely no default. So, SEWA Bank was lending, and Yes Bank put the first loss default guarantee, which we did not have to use at all. That gave the confidence to the nationalized bank to lend even without a collateral to these salt pan workers. So I'm sure that our experience also shows that poor do not want charity. All they need
Mm.
is an enabling environment or an opportunity that will equip them in their fight against poverty. It is their fight against poverty. We as Seva are just facilitating them.
I think that for me, it was a privilege of my lifetime to come and actually see this in action, learn from it firsthand. And, you described some incredible outcomes, but they weren't without challenges, of course. As you said, you didn't need to use that first loss guarantee, but actually securing that first loss guarantee was quite a challenge. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mentioned a minute ago, which is that the NRDC, the National Resource Defense Council, supported SEWA in developing a bit of a business proposition in order to then approach the IFC and secure that along with some of the private finance players you mentioned? Just give everyone a sense of that process of developing really a formal finance mechanism that could actually work for informal workers.
As you rightly mentioned, the profile of these informal sector women workers, the salt pan workers, is that they hardly had any savings or not even a bank account of their own, living in stark poverty, no assets of their own. They live in the desert in a makeshift little hut. And very often, when the sandstorms blow, their hut also gets blown away. Education is therefore even a distant or a far cry for them. And for the banks to lend to these kind of poorest of the poor without any security, without any collateral, was extremely difficult. And therefore, I think when we ran the pilot for 10 pumps, first we requested the NRTC if they could help us, do a systematic data collection on what was the amount that was lent to the salt pan workers, what kind of savings it led to by reduction in the diesel oil, what kind of increased production capacity of the salt pan workers increased by, since now they could pump out more water as they did not have to pay for the diesel, they were able to produce more salt. And then they helped have a round table with some of the bankers of our country to demonstrate that this is a viable business proposition. And that, with the savings in 3 years' time or even less than that, the women are able to repay back. And then we brought in the International Finance Corporation, so that how do we, if the banks were even showing some positive inclination that, yes, they were coming forward, then how do we design the entire financial architecture? And that was a process that took us almost about 18 months to bring everyone on the same table, the bankers, the International Finance Corporation, SEWA, who represented the salt pan workers, and NRTC, and also the government, the national government, because, what role can the government play in this? And that's how the entire financial architecture was worked out, where the private sector bank, Yes Bank, came forward to put in the first loss guarantee. And therefore, we started with 200 pumps and then scaled it to 7,000 pumps.
2 points I guess I want to pick up on that are connected. In terms of scale, what you have achieved in such a short period of time, starting from 10 pumps up to 7,000, the contribution that that has to decarbonization, especially if that model were replicated globally. Just thinking about even 1% of the world's informal workers who work through this sort of off-grid diesel-based production and the dent that would make in global emissions. Incredible. I think the lesson I certainly observed within that, but would love for you to speak more to, is around government. As you mentioned, they have such a critical role to play in creating the enabling environment. And another challenge SEWA really had to overcome was that in India, the system was not designed for small scale solar production in this way. And you had to do quite a bit to advocate for that market access as much as anything. Can you share a little bit more about that journey and also, of course, where you are today, which is not just solar at the salt farms themselves, but I won't spoil the ending, an incredible expansion of that value chain.
I would like to mention three aspects to what you just asked me. One is the whole decarbonization. And, when the women and their families started seeing that what substantial saving in diesel oil, where they were using 200 barrels of diesel oil in the season, they only had to use 100. And therefore, the women had the confidence to also buy a second solar pump so that, their entire consumption of diesel became nil. And that was a huge saving. So now they had, very good green asset ownership in having two diesel solar pumps and then not using even 1 liter of diesel oil. The productivity of salt increased, the quality of the salt also improved. And then we thought that during the off season, which is monsoon, when the desert gets flooded, we used to dismantle the panels and take them and put them in a warehouse, whereas the women still had to continue paying the EMI. So, how do we work out another effective solution for that? Two things that we did. How do we take this salt pan workers to the carbon market? And that's where again we approached IFC, who provided us with the technical assistance that first of all, how does the carbon market work? How do we register our program? What kind of data you need to track? How do you track that data? So we worked on that, and then the salt pan workers, after about 1 year, started receiving carbon credits. The second thing that we wanted to do was also that, as you rightly said, how can the government also strengthen the lives and the livelihoods of these poorest of the poor trade group? So we advocated for two things with the government. One is that how can the government support in reducing the cost of these solar pumps? The women had already gone forward and borrowed the amount, but can government share half of the cost of the solar pump or even more? And luckily, we were able to convince the government of our state and also the national government, and they shared 70% of the cost of the solar pump. But at first, the women had to borrow. They had to install, they had to show the proof that the pump is up and running. There were a lot of verifications and everything. And in the third year or the fourth year only that the women would avail the support from the government. But that was a huge support for the women. And the second was that we thought that since the women have to repay back the loan, why don't we set up a solar park, a mini grid, where, the energy that is produced could be sold to the grid, and the women could have additional source of revenue by that as well. And it was the first time ever that a women-owned mini grid is set up, and the government of Gujarat stepped forward and then signed a power purchase agreement with these salt pan workers. And Manguben, who is one of the salt pan workers, we trained young salt pan workers like Manguben to do the operations, maintenance, the installation. So the women themselves are not just the owners and managers of the solar park, but they install, they operate, they manage, and then they sell the energy. And that's a huge step forward in empowering these women.
It's extraordinary, that aspect of training. And there's so many aspects of win-win-win involved for the government itself in terms of cleaning up its grid. You are contributing renewable energy now, and that solar park is a sight to behold. But it's also powered by the skills that SEWA, in partnership with several different organizations, has built at its Solar Academy, which really advances significantly an otherwise existential challenge, I think, for the green transition, which is having adequate skills. So again, for business, I think the lesson in playing a role in these kinds of cooperative approaches, ecosystem building around the green skills transition. Can you say a little bit more, perhaps, just about that to our listeners who are often in business and policy? What can they learn from how SEWA approaches change at that community level?
So let me share with you, Haley, from our experience that poor alone cannot fight poverty. And also, if you want to make this transition just but also sustainable over a longer period of time, partnerships do make a huge difference and add value to the whole process of just transition. So we partnered with private company called Renew Power in our country, and also with the Green Skills Sector Council run by the National Skills Development Corporation of Government of India, and with UNEP, the UN Agency for Environment. And we designed a whole curriculum on green skilling. As I mentioned earlier, that the transition should also lead to livelihood security. So how does it also lead to newer opportunities of livelihoods as well, which are decent and dignified? So we designed a curriculum. Young daughters of the salt pan workers are trained like Manguben, and Renew Power now provides them with work and placements in their solar plants or in their solar panel manufacturing companies. And not only that, with the support of Renew Power, UNEP, and Green Skills Sector Council, we also organize roundtables where a lot of private sector companies in the sector of power, both renewable energy, they come, and then we work on placements of these young girls. So that's one major role that the private sector has to play. The second major role that the private sector plays is we produce salt, which is now a better quality, a green salt. And how can the private sector therefore buy directly from these salt pan workers rather than going through the agents or the middlemen? And we have an agribusiness company which acts as an aggregator, and then we link them with Tata Power or with Unilever, who then procure the salt directly from these salt pan workers. And that makes the transition a just transition. The women salt pan workers who are at the very bottom end of the value chain are now getting integrated higher into the value chain. You make the value chain far more transparent and also just and sustainable.
And it, again, was amazing to just see the impact that kind of very targeted gender empowerment had in real time, completely transformational overnight, and including the skills these women are now bringing into their communities as far as becoming solar consultants, really, in terms of rooftop solar around their communities and taking those skills in many different directions. Reema, thank you so much, not just for your leadership, but helping us all understand that a just transition really isn't just a slogan. It's something that begins with organizing with trust, with solidarity between not just workers, but their communities, business, government, and civil society writ large.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now let's hear from the women whose work demonstrates that incredible transformation can be achieved through that vision. And please note this story is voiced by AI.
Agents of green transition. Gujarat's women, salt farmers, signal a cleaner, fairer future for informal workers. In the salt flats of Gujarat, India's invisible women workers are leading an unlikely green revolution. With support from trade union SEWA, thousands of informal salt farmers are swapping diesel pumps for solar power, cutting emissions, raising incomes, and proving that the path to net zero can start in the world's most marginalized corners. As you reach for the salt shaker at dinner tonight, pause for a moment to consider those fine white crystals. They may represent the final stage of a journey that starts in a harsh, unforgiving world few ever see. These crystals could well derive from the blistered salt flats of Surendranagar in the western reaches of the Indian state of Gujarat. For generations, families like Manguben Jagas have toiled from dawn to well past dusk in the 45 degrees Celsius heat and blinding sun to produce one of the world's most essential and undervalued minerals. And thanks to climate change, their lives are only getting tougher. Salt is everything here, Manguben tells the Just Stories team as she crouches beside a large rectangular earthen pan filled with evaporating brine. She scoops up a handful of large pearly white cuboids, one of nature's wondrous geometric forms, her face wrapped in a thin scarf to protect against the unrelenting glare. We don't go to the office. This, she gestures to the gleaming desert, is our office. The ground is parched and fissured like cracked porcelain, but in the distance, flamingos dot a flooded plain, an ominous sign for the salt farmers. Despite its refreshing relief, early rain can ruin a salt harvest. A grime-encrusted diesel-powered pump sits quietly by one of the nearby pans, a once essential cog in the process, both a blessing and a curse for the women, and a pernicious source of carbon emissions weighing heavily on India's net zero transition. We used to spend everything we earned on diesel and repairs, Manguben says. There was nothing left at the end of the season. She recalls the engine breaking down mid-season, the belts snapping, and how they would have to wait days for a mechanic to come from the nearest town. One year, it didn't start for 10 days. We lost so much time and income. India is the world's third largest salt producer, 80% of which comes from these inland salt flats in Gujarat. The vast majority of the workforce here are women like Manguben, but for decades, they have received a pittance for their backbreaking labor, reliant on extortionate loans to buy diesel at inflated prices at the start of the season and forced to sell their salt at rock-bottom prices by exploitative middlemen. At just 26 years old, Manguben has already spent over a decade working under the harsh conditions of the salt farms. Every year, she and her family of 10 migrate 40 kilometers from their village to the desert, where they will live in a chapara, a makeshift hut made of sticks and tarpaulin, for the next 8 months. The women sleep inside and the men under the stars. Her day starts at 7 a.m. with a quick breakfast of bajri no rotlo, millet roti, and black tea. And then she's straight into the brine, repairing lining, fixing leaks in pipes, monitoring water levels, stamping down and raking the salt in her bare feet to create the perfect size crystals. She breaks at midday to have a simple lunch of rice and dal before returning to the pans, only stopping when the stars start to glimmer in the sky. There is no running water, no electricity, no shade. We work with our feet in salt water all day, she says. It burns when you have cuts. But there's no choice. You have to keep going. Manguben's hands are painted white with salt, with water too precious to wash them. Their supplies are only for drinking, and sparingly. After a few hours in the desert, your skin starts to feel sticky and clogged. like you've been bathing in the sea. Manguben now travels home for a weekly shower, a luxury that she has only recently been able to afford. But as for most of the 2 billion unregistered, untaxed, and unprotected workers that comprise the world's informal economy, that's just the way it goes, particularly for women. For Manguben, however, that changed recently when the Self-Employed Women Association SEWA, a trade union that advocates for the rights of low-income, independently employed women across India's informal sector, posed some simple but powerful questions. What if these agariyas, salt pan workers, also owned the energy that powered their salt production and were able to maintain the technology themselves? And what if that energy was clean and healthy for both the women and the environment? Over the past decade, with help from SEWA and its partners, the agariyas have been steadily replacing their diesel-powered pumps with solar-powered equivalents, facilitated by comprehensive green skills training and funded through a pioneering financing scheme, thereby slashing emissions, cutting costs, and giving the women control over their own economic futures. Now, we don't spend on diesel. We save. We decide together, Manguben says. We used to feel helpless. Now we feel proud. On the horizon, a plume of dark smoke rises endlessly from a neighbor's diesel pump. But here, 2 small solar panels tilt toward the sky. They make no sound, no smoke, just consistent, reliable power from the sun. Indeed, in this barren moonscape, a quiet revolution is taking place in one of the world's most grueling industries, one that could transform how we think about just transitions to net zero emissions, and more specifically, how to realize basic human, gender, and labor rights in the world's shadow economy. With hundreds of thousands of salt pan workers worldwide and millions of women working in informal, carbon-intensive sectors more broadly, SEWA's business model provides a blueprint for climate action boosted by an underutilized power source, women. This is one of the most stunning examples of a truly just transition, says Mary Robinson, former Irish president and UN Human Rights Commissioner and co-founder of women-led climate justice campaign Project Dandelion, a close partner of SEWA's, after visiting the salt pans with the Just Stories team in February. From bullocks to diesel to solar, owned and run by the women themselves, it's a rare, holistic story, one the rest of the world should be learning from. A cycle of exploitation. Salt has been integral to India's culture and economy for millennia. Here it is known as the juice of life, says Reema Nanavaty, director of SEWA. People buy it before sunrise to ensure a good day. And yet the country's 30 million ton annual salt industry is one of the world's most extractive and unequal, shaped by generations of systemic exploitation and neglect. The mineral is also intertwined with India's colonial history. In 1930, Gandhi's salt march against the oppressive salt tax imposed by the British became an integral moment of defiance in the country's fight for independence. Gandhi specifically chose salt as it is a humble commodity produced by the country's most vulnerable and impoverished workers, says Nanavaty. In Gujarat, particularly in the arid inland regions of Kutch and Banaskantha, the industry is still dominated by small-scale informal farmers, the agariyas, who employ the traditional technique of evaporating brine in earth-dug pans to produce salt and have limited access to technology or finance. Every year, from October to June, the agariyas pump brine water into a series of increasingly saline pans. The desert sun crystallizes it into salt, which the farmers continuously compact and rake until it forms perfectly sized crystal cubes. They then sell their harvest to local traders, primarily intermediary buyers from the Marwar region of Rajasthan, who transport it via road and rail to processing facilities. Companies like Tata Salt then wash, grind, and refine the salt before packaging it for various markets. For export, the salt travels to Indian ports, crosses oceans on cargo ships, and enters another country's distribution network through importers and wholesalers. Finally, it reaches supermarket shelves, where it is bought by consumers to equip their kitchens and dinner tables. Historically, the agariyas would rely on bullocks to power the pumps that extract the brine from underground reservoirs. But for the past 60 years, that role has mostly been performed by diesel-powered pumps, which are both expensive and environmentally damaging. In a region already facing the pernicious impacts of climate change, the rising temperatures, and extreme weather conditions, these pumps contribute to only make the agariya's lives harder. An agariya family will use around 1,300 liters of diesel to power their pumps during the 8-month farming season. In the Rann of Kutch alone, the annual diesel consumption of 56 million liters across 43,000 families is responsible for an estimated 115,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions. This pollution is not only a climate concern, but also a health issue, with workers inhaling the toxic fumes while performing their grueling labor, resulting in regular respiratory illnesses. The reliance on diesel not only keeps workers financially shackled, but it perpetuates health hazards that are life-threatening, Samir Quatra, India's Senior Director at the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, a key partner for SEWA's SALT program, explains. The environmental cost is the tip of the iceberg. It's the invisible toll on these families that goes unnoticed. In order to reach the subterranean water, the agariyas dig 30-foot narrow holes in the dry earth. They wear a rope in case they pass out from a carbon monoxide leak and have to be dragged to safety. Some die each year. It's dangerous, but we have no choice but to keep working, says Manguben. Although salt farming is a family business for the agariyas, the cultural norm is for the women to do the most laborious and backbreaking of the salt farming work, and for men to deal with the business and finances. As such, these women are often excluded from the decision-making processes that impact their lives, from wage setting to financial and energy independence. They are often forced to rely on male intermediaries to purchase diesel, negotiate with traders, and even manage household finances, perpetuating gender inequities. The women are typically the last to be paid for their salt. Lacking the labor protections of a formal sector, most agariyas must take out working capital loans from the traders at the start of a season to pay upfront for the diesel for their pumps. This gives the traders control over the flow of capital, and a poor season can often result in an agariya family becoming trapped in a vicious cycle of debt, akin to a form of debt bondage. The system is rigged, says Hinaben Dev, Vice President of SEWA. The women have no say over pricing or when they get paid. They work hard, but their earnings are constantly at the mercy of traders who have all the power. Staring forlornly at the heat-undulating horizon, Manguben recounts, "I would work under the scorching sun, day after day, but most of the money would go to the traders. I was lucky if I got paid on time." In real terms, agariya families pay 40 to 60% of their annual income on diesel and only earn around 150 rupees for each ton of salt, while the market price is over 17,000 rupees. The traders, who hold a quasi-monopoly on the rail wagons that transport the salt around the country, take the rest. It's a vicious cycle, says Quatra. Once they fall into debt, it becomes impossible to break free. The traders hold all the leverage, and the workers, particularly the women, are left with very little choice but to continue working under these conditions. This is compounded by the seasonality of the industry, with the women having to disrupt their families and communities by migrating to find work in the 4-month off-season. Often, they have to take on new loans to get by, further entrenching their indebtedness. During the off-season, my family would struggle to find enough work, recalls Manguben. We would rely on loans from traders, and if the season was bad, we couldn't pay them back. It was a never-ending cycle. After understanding the multifaceted plights of these women, SEWA realized that any climate solution had to also incorporate the social and economic issues as well. It's not just about reducing diesel use. It's about empowering women to take control of their work and their lives, says Nanavaty. Women Taking Power, literally. Founded in 1972 by the late Ela Bhatt, a renowned Indian lawyer and social activist, SEWA has long been a leading force for gender equity in India, today boasting 3.2 million members across the country. Originally focused on cities, the union began to spread out to rural areas in the late 1980s. The textile artisans would always disappear around October, and then we eventually realized they would be going to the salt pans, said Nanavaty. So we spent a month living in the desert with them to understand their issues and realized they were essentially in bonded labor. In fact, the traders would try to sabotage us by slashing our tires and so on, so that we couldn't help the women. They officially started working with the Agariyas in 2010, providing them with healthcare and childcare support, but soon realized that more fundamental changes were needed. After a year of consultation with the women, SEWA identified the solar pump transition as the most impactful course of action. We didn't impose a solution on the women, Dave explains. We were listening, not just providing. We asked the women what they needed, and they identified solar pumps as the best solution. To test the technical feasibility, SEWA launched a pilot in 2013 with 14 solar pumps for 14 Agariya women. The Agariyas were given zero-interest loans through SEWA's district-level association. The participating women, 2 using solar-only systems and 14 using hybrid solar diesel systems, recorded major cost reductions. SEWA also helped the women organize producer cooperatives, businesses where producers pool their output for their common benefit, to bargain for better prices with salt traders and factories. However, a lack of access to finance meant SEWA could not scale the program sufficiently. SEWA then partnered NRDC in 2014 to build a business case to bring solar pumps to all the Agariya families. With support from US-based renewable energy company Sun Edison, they distributed 200 solar-powered water pumps to Agariyas in the Little Rann of Kutch. The resulting economic, social, environmental, and commercial benefits witnessed by the participants served to kickstart the expansion of the program. Based on the usage of the salt farmers, SEWA and NRDC developed, with help from engineers from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, technical specifications for efficient solar pumps for the desert, such as the size of electric motors and solar panels required. They also worked with the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, MNRE, to better incorporate these specifications in its capital subsidy scheme, which was intended for larger capacity irrigation pumps. Next, the partners engaged with the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development, NABARD, the government agency implementing the subsidy to ensure it reached the farmers. In addition, the government of Gujarat announced 80% subsidies on solar water pumps for salt farming in 2017. These incentives helped reduce the salt farmers' upfront costs to purchase the pumps. However, the Agariyas still required loans to purchase the pumps. At $2,000 to $2,500 each, the pumps were still out of reach for the Agariyas' meager $100 per month salaries. Micro businesses typically face challenges in obtaining loans for equipment and technological investments due to risk perceptions of traditional lenders. So, SEWA and NRDC worked with the women to explore ways to attract more government and private finances. Discussions with leading financiers such as the International Finance Corporation, IFC, highlighted the opportunity for sustainable finance for clean energy, addressing common barriers to financial access such as lack of identification and address documents, insufficient awareness amongst the women about formal banking requirements, and lack of access to loans due to the seasonal nature of the Agariya's income. The partners eventually identified 3 successful financing measures to reduce the cost and corresponding loan amount for the women, vendor financing, capital subsidies, and low-cost loans. SEWA loaned the solar pumps to its members on 5-year, zero-interest installment plans, with Sun Edison providing the pumps to SEWA at zero-cost vendor financing. To avoid burdening the farmers, the installments were seasonal, payable during the salt production season. These loans were affordable because of the money the farmers saved on diesel, which effectively meant that the pumps paid for themselves by the end of the period. With a 12% interest rate, the payback period for the women switching to hybrid pumps was as low as 38 months. The salt farmers' successful repayment record in the early stages demonstrated the economic viability of the solar pump financing. In the subsequent phases, SEWA Bank's grassroots trading network for women, GTNFW, facilitated the financing. SEWA Bank itself was set up in 1974 as a cooperative bank aimed at providing credit to SEWA members to empower them and reduce their dependence on money sharks. But to attract more commercial banks to the scheme, IFC created a blended finance mechanism using public sources of capital to attract private investment to de-risk the credit. The IFC used philanthropic funds provided by India's Yes Bank to create a first loss guarantee for the lenders, which would cover the first 25% of losses in the case of defaults. With the first loss guarantee, we were able to provide a risk mitigation solution that reassured the lenders, says Arun Sharma, the then Chief Investment Officer at the IFC, who led the structuring. With risk of losses due to borrower defaults significantly reduced, SEWA Bank could then make loans in amounts way over their normal credit limit. Banks have limits on how much they can lend to specific customer segments to finance the solar pump purchases by the Agarias. This mechanism helped SEWA Bank finance another 600 solar pumps in 2017 and convinced Bank of Baroda, India's third-largest public sector bank, BOB, to extend loans at reasonable rates to the Agarias. BOB and SEWA signed a Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, where BOB committed to extending direct loans for 15,000 more solar pumps, enabling a massive expansion of the project. SEWA also realized that because of the emissions reductions deriving from replacing the diesel with solar power, the program was eligible for carbon credits, tradable certificates that can be bought and sold to offset emissions, either through projects that prevent emissions or projects that remove existing greenhouse gases. After 3 years in the making, a carbon credit scheme came online on the gold standard trading platform in 2018, with the proceeds helping pay off the women's loans for the solar pumps. The carbon credits were a game changer, says Atul Bagai, UNEP's then country manager for India, another key partner on the program. They provided an additional stream of income, which helped us maintain the financial sustainability of the program. But eventually, SEWA realized it was at risk repeating one of the mistakes of the past, where the women were reliant on male engineers or outside experts to install the diesel pumps or fix them when they regularly broke down. To solve this, in 2019, SEWA, with the help of UNEP and India's Skill Council for Green Jobs, set up a program to train the women themselves as solar engineers, able to install and maintain their own solar panels and pumps and, importantly, other solar infrastructure, too. It was quite a surreal sight watching Reema and UNEP's chief sign an MOU in the middle of the desert surrounded by thousands of women, recalls Bagai. There was huge market demand in India for solar engineers, and we realized that we could also answer that need with this project. It was a win-win situation. The women gained financial independence, and the renewable energy sector gained a skilled workforce to support its expansion. After some initial success, UNEP decided the training could be better handled by a local renewable energy company and went in search of a possible private sector partner. With a strong business presence in Gujarat, Renew fitted the bill perfectly. The company joined the project and launched its Project Surya training program in 2022 with the aim of training 1,000 Agraria women as solar technicians. The project was anchored by Renew Foundation, which was established following India's 2014 legislation mandating companies to allocate 2% of profits on corporate social responsibility (CSR). But the company knew that the work made sense from a business perspective too. Renew never promised jobs, but we knew there was a significant demand for skills in the sector, and so a gap which needed urgent attention, says Vaishali Nigam Sinha, co-founder of Renew and chair of the Renew Foundation. With solar and wind facilities across India, finding skilled talent locally remains a challenge we are determined to solve by ensuring women get trained and are at the forefront to fill this gap. Manguben completed the training in 2019 and now is a registered solar technician. She is in charge of the family's solar pump system and is able to fix it when it breaks. In the off-season, she earns a living installing solar infrastructure in other villages. Before, I never imagined that I could be a technician. The salt pans were my entire life, she says. It's a huge change for me. And the program's evolution didn't stop there. SEWA realized that the off-season served as an opportunity to turn the women into energy entrepreneurs. We wanted the women to own the whole value chain of the solar energy, explains Nanavaty. They devised the idea of a temporary solar park at the edge of the desert, where the women could transport and install their individual solar panels at the end of the season. This seasonal solar park would then generate electricity to sell to the grid during the off-season until the solar panels were needed back in the desert the following season. Now, the solar panels don't sit idle during the off-season, explains Dave. The women pool their panels into a collective solar park and they sell electricity to the grid, creating a new, passive income stream that isn't reliant on the salt pans. The SEWA model, an exercise in collective will. And after years of iterative development, the comprehensive model that has emerged based on cooperative ownership, training, and collective empowerment is already bearing fruit. So far, there have been 7,000 solar-powered pumps installed across the region. On average, this has led to a 30 to 33% rise in income from salt production for the recipients. However, when including the additional income streams provided by the collective solar park and work opportunities for solar technicians, the women have increased their salaries from between 5,000 to 10,000 rupees, $58 to $116 each year, to around 40,000 to 60,000 rupees for 165 hours to 698, a remarkable 600% increase on average. And incredibly, there have been zero defaults so far, so we've already been able to repay the philanthropic funds that backstop the 25% first loss guarantee to Yes Bank, adds Sharma. SEWA engenders such loyalty and trust amongst its members that these women will do everything within their power to avoid defaulting on their loans. It's a real exercise in collective will. According to an analysis conducted by SEWA, the fuel and maintenance savings from replacing the diesel with solar have led to an average 60% reduction in the women's operational costs. Furthermore, the 5-year agreement signed with Gold Standard has seen 1,100 Agaria women each earn $35 to $40 per year from carbon credits, with 15% of that amount used to repay their loans. By forming cooperatives, the Agirias have also gained the collective bargaining power to negotiate better prices with the traders, moving away from a system where traders unilaterally set prices. The salt price has increased 20% to 120 rupees per metric ton since the start of the project, according to SEWA. SEWA also found that 70% of the participating women have been able to invest their additional income in improving their children's education and healthcare. We can now send our children to school without worrying about the cost, says Manguben. Manguben has found the solar pumps to be much more efficient than their diesel-powered predecessor. Consequently, she has repaid her loan on the first solar pump and purchased 3 more, now running 4 pumps continuously, which was never previously possible. Before the solar transition, her family produced 600 to 650 tons of salt each year. After adopting the new technology, their production nearly doubled to around 1,100 tons. She now saves over 200,000 rupees, 20,229 each season. The savings have allowed the family to pay off their loan, buy 3 extra pumps, a tractor, and a motorbike, build 2 houses, pay for the education of Manguben's nephews and nieces, attend social events like weddings, and generally improve their entire quality of life. Before the solar panels, we would be struggling to make ends meet, and the off-season was an extremely stressful time. Now, not only do I save money on diesel, but I also earn from the solar park and my solar skills. My salt income has gone up by nearly 30%, and I can plan better for my family's future. On average, each solar pump reduces emissions by 2.7 tons of CO2 annually. The 7,000 pumps installed so far therefore reduce emissions by 18,900 annual tons of CO2 each year, equivalent to taking over 4,000 cars off the road. Furthermore, the solar park has a capacity of 2.7 megawatts of renewable electricity. What started as a way to reduce the burden of diesel has now evolved into a model that not only saves money but also reduces our environmental footprint, says Nanavaty. Additionally, the 100,000 liters of diesel that are not burnt as a result of the project means less pollution and a significant risk reduction for the Agariya's health. When I used to work with diesel pumps, my chest would often hurt from the fumes. I'm so relieved that those days are behind me, remarks Manguben. But for the women themselves, the impact of the project has been far more than just economic or environmental. For many, the independence and autonomy it has engendered has completely changed their roles within their families and communities. For Manguben, it has engineered a newfound sense of financial independence. Before, I would ask for permission to spend money. Now, I can decide for myself. I don't have to ask anyone, and that feels empowering, she says. For Payal Dharamsibai Mitalia, a 21-year-old Agariya woman who joined SEWA 3 years ago to train as a full-time solar engineer, the increased income and autonomy have shifted the power dynamics within families, allowing the women to make decisions that were once out of reach, including how to allocate household resources and invest in their children's future. Before we joined SEWA, we were seen as helpers in the household, but now we're seen as contributors. I can support my siblings' education, and I'm proud of that, she says. Sania Salimbai Diwan, an 18-year-old third-generation SEWA member, now proudly supports her elder brother's higher education using her newfound income of 400 rupees per day, contributing to his MSc fees, a step that she could never have imagined before joining SEWA. Manguben has noticed that her neighbors are increasingly encouraging their daughters to associate with her in the hope of joining SEWA and accessing similar opportunities. I feel like I've stepped into a new world. I'm no longer invisible. I can make decisions for myself and my family. And when I see the change in my children's lives, I know that I am building a better future for them. Beyond the underlying energy transition, SEWA's project has allowed many of these women to aspire to higher education, professional careers, and the ability to contribute meaningfully to and even lead their communities. Both Payal and Sania plan to use their incomes to pursue higher education. Before joining SEWA, we didn't even have dreams. Now, I see a future where anything is possible, says Payal. While formal unions play a crucial role in advocating for labor rights, ensuring fair wages, and improving working conditions at the national level, informal workers, like the Agariyas, typically find themselves excluded from these protections. Without the support of formal unions, many workers in the informal economy, especially women, face exploitation, lack of social security, and limited bargaining power. Organizations like SEWA are essential to bridging this gap by organizing informal workers like salt farmers, street vendors, and waste pickers, offering them a platform to voice their concerns, negotiate better wages, and advocate for their human and labor rights. For Alison Tate, former Director of Economic and Social Policy At the ITOK, the powerful model SEWA and its partners have created through the project shifts the members from being price takers in the salt market to price makers, and no longer dependent on the price of diesel. It represents a fundamental shift for women workers who for generations have been exploited. They now have economic power and dignity, the power to transform their own working conditions and their future. A scalable solution. Indeed, beyond the desiccated flats of Surendranagar, SEWA's underlying model offers untold promise both within India and elsewhere in the world. Its obvious application would be in non-industrialized salt industries, but it also could be applied to other small-scale informal sectors where workers rely on fossil fuel-powered production to make their living, offering the potential to supercharge the world's just transition to net zero in the process. SEWA's SALT program ensures the human, gender, and labor rights for the Agariyas by organizing them into a union that provides them with a platform to negotiate fair wages, better working conditions, and improve social protections. By offering legal support, financial inclusion, and access to clean energy solutions like solar-powered pumps, SEWA empowers the women to assert their rights in their workplace and community. The program also fosters gender equity by challenging traditional power dynamics, ensuring that women are not only treated fairly, but are also given the opportunity to lead and advocate for their own rights in the salt farming sector. Through this unionization, SEWA strengthens labor rights for those typically excluded from formal protections, building dignity and respect for all its participants. Scaling SEWA's program, which is still in its infancy, to the 43,000 Ajiriya families in Gujarat's Ran of Kutch region could save roughly 115,000 tons of CO2 each year, roughly the equivalent to taking 25,000 cars off the road, according to NRDC's estimates. But across the entirety of India, some calculate there to be as many as 150,000 salt pan workers. Although an official analysis hasn't been done, if each of these workers exchanged their diesel-powered pumps for solar equivalents and achieved the same emissions reductions as seen in SEWA's project, 2.7 tons of CO2 per year, this would reduce roughly 400,000 tons of CO2 emissions each year. Similarly, there are thought to be several 100,000 more artisanal salt farmers across the world, particularly in China, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Indonesia, and Senegal. Many of these are either wholly or partially reliant on diesel-powered pumps to either extract brine from subterranean water tables or to manage the distribution of brine from the sea at coastal pans. If all were to switch to solar-powered pumps, this would equate to well over 1 million tons of CO2 emissions saved every year. But SEWA's solar model is not limited to the salt industry, and there are many more fossil fuel-reliant sectors across India and the world, from construction materials to textiles to agriculture, that could reap its benefits and bolster the power of informal workers. Several other entities are now trying to use similar models with underserved micro-enterprises and other low-income borrowers, says Sharma. Business models differ among sectors, but what is scalable is the basic solution: an ability to aggregate and motivate borrowers to borrow, productively use, and service affordable credit, a transition from fossil fuels, green skills, and financial literacy training, and a risk mitigation structure for lenders. Artisanal brick kilns, mainly found in emerging and developing economies, are major contributors to global greenhouse gas (GHG) emissions and air pollution. They are typically small-scale, informal operations that often rely on inefficient firing methods and polluting fuels like coal. Approximately 1.5 trillion clay bricks are produced worldwide each year, with about 90% of this production based in Asia. The coal consumed by the brick industry in the top 5 Asian brick-producing countries emits 1.2% of all global anthropogenic CO2 emissions. Transitioning these brick kilns to solar power, as seen recently in Uttar Pradesh, could make a huge dent in the world's emissions reduction target. And if using SEWA's model could improve the quality of life for the 16 million workers employed across South Asia. Similarly, the global textiles industry produces 3 to 10% of the world's annual greenhouse gas emissions, with roughly 35% of the 450 million strong global workforce employed informally in countries like India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, 75% of whom are women. For instance, in Bangladesh, an estimated 7,000 informal garment factories operate, employing tens of thousands of workers, predominantly women, under precarious conditions. But, according to Tate, solar cooperatives in garment factories, particularly rooftop solar installations, could provide more regular electricity and stable working hours and income for garment workers, as well as access to power at home. This model is seen in various countries, including South Africa, where unions are involved, Brazil, Senegal, and Indonesia, and can be implemented through worker cooperatives or other collaborative structures, she says. But perhaps the most exciting application for SEWA's model would be to replace diesel-powered irrigation pumps on the world's small-scale farms. The 600 million smallholder farmers around the world, predominantly based in low-income countries, produce a third of the world's food, and many rely on diesel-powered pumps to irrigate their farms. According to research, solar-powered irrigation systems can cut these farmers' energy costs by 80% and reduce emissions by 95%. And in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, research from International Water Management Institute found that these systems have led to increases in annual yields by 30 to 60%. In India alone, it is estimated that 5 million solar-powered irrigation pumps could save 10 billion liters of diesel, reducing emissions by 26 million tons, according to CEEW research. The scalability of this model for solar irrigation pumps for small-scale farmers is absolutely massive, says Kamya Choudhary, India Policy Fellow at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. But the training and capacity building are fundamental. I've seen it so many times. The clean tech breaks and there's no one to fix it, so it's disregarded and the farmers return to the old ways. Indeed, the training facet of SEWA's model not only addresses this issue, but also solves a secondary problem facing governments everywhere, a lack of green skills to build the net zero transition. According to the ILO, there is a projected shortfall of 85 million green jobs by 2030, particularly in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and energy efficiency. And through the likes of Manguben, Sanya, and Payal, SEWA is providing India with a new generation of skilled technicians to drive the country's green transition. Investing in green jobs for informal workers doesn't just meet energy demands, it accelerates the global transition to net zero and builds new opportunities in a sustainable economy, says Choudhary. And of course, empowering these informal sector workers also meets their economic demands too, which in turn could offer a significant boost for the global economy at a time it needs it most. There are currently 2 billion informal sector workers, representing 58% of the world's working population, 90% in low-income countries. According to the ILO, formalizing these workers would provide them with better wages, benefits, and legal protections to contribute more effectively to their economies, which could lead to a boost in global GDP by as much as 15% and add $6 trillion in the global economy. The process of formalization is fundamental to a just transition and the protection of vulnerable communities against the negative impacts of climate and environmental change, says Alison Tate. Organizing workers in informal employment offers huge potential benefits to the workers themselves, to their families, and to the economy. There are organizations and networks of informal workers around the world, from salt farmers in India to waste pickers in Latin America, adds Martha Chen, former lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School and founding international coordinator of the Global Research Policy Action Network, Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing We Go. These organizations engage in collective bargaining and advocacy for policy change. Some operate as cooperatives to pursue their trade. A greener world must also be a just one. But perhaps most important is the potential that the model offers specifically for the 740 million women working in the world's informal sector, without whom reaching net zero will remain a pipe dream. In countries like India, Bangladesh, and Ethiopia, these women face a web of overlapping oppressions that intersect with issues of gender, class, and race. The Agarias, for instance, are of the Chunvalia Kolis caste, classified as an other backward class by the Gujarat government. Yet, such women are often the end users of leading climate solutions such as clean cook stoves, solar irrigation systems, and solar-powered sewing machines. The proliferation of these solutions must therefore serve to empower them both socially and economically, rather than preserve the existing inequities of the fossil-based economy. Under international human rights law, women everywhere have the right to live free from discrimination, the right to education, the right to health, the right to own property, the right to work, and the right to equal opportunities. If we are serious about reaching net zero by 2050, we must recognize that women in the informal economy hold the key, says Choudhary. They are the ones who will implement renewable technologies, from solar power to green agriculture. If we leave them behind, we won't reach net zero. Women in the informal sector are often excluded from decision-making related to energy access, technology adoption, and financial services. SEWA's model empowers them to not just adopt green technologies, but also to own and control them, ensuring access to the benefits that accrue from them. This not only enhances their income, but also their social status in communities, allowing them to move from economic marginalization to positions of leadership and economic self-sufficiency. The ability to contribute financially and to make decisions for their families is a critical component of gender equity and equal rights. Collective action models, like SEWA's, also provide a collective voice to women who would otherwise be silenced in policy conversations that shape their future. Countries like Benin are already seeing the sense in centering women in their solar irrigation programs, says Choudhary. A greener world can also be a juster one. Gender-neutral approaches can end up preserving the existing hierarchies. The green transition holds the potential to either rectify past gender injustices associated with the fossil-based economy or perpetuate them. Currently, women are projected to hold a mere 25% of global green jobs by 2030, according to the Boston Consulting Group. Green transition is a chance for social change, says Choudhary. The fossil economy often led to male-dominated sectors, as seen in hard-to-abate industries. But now, the green economy is emerging as an opportunity to correct this imbalance. Women can be at the forefront of the transition, shaping the future while ensuring that the benefits of this transition and green jobs are equitably distributed. For a transition to net zero to be just, it must be inclusive, ensuring that those who have been historically marginalized are not just participants, but leaders in the process, and addressing the structural sexism of the fossil-based economy offers the opportunity to benefit not just women, but society as a whole. These women have the potential to be the agents of change in driving the green transition and ensuring that global climate goals are met. It's not just women who benefit from SEWA's model, says Quatra. It's by women, but for families. And we've seen time and time again that women make the best agents of green transition. Indeed, global research indicates female leaders are more likely to support climate action and sustainability. For instance, countries with a larger share of women in parliament are more likely to ratify environmental treaties and adopt policies that address climate change. And in the private sector, studies show that companies with a larger share of women on their boards are more likely to improve energy efficiency, reduce firms' overall environmental impact, and invest in renewable energy. And then there's the economic imperative. The World Bank estimates that closing the gender gap in employment and entrepreneurship could increase global GDP by more than 20%, while the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has categorized the correction of the misallocation of women's talents and abilities as a method for boosting productivity. By formalizing informal sector workers, especially women, and empowering them to participate in the green economy, countries can unlock this massive economic potential while simultaneously advancing gender equity. Unionization empowers women to demand recognition, improve their working conditions, and ultimately secure better economic and social outcomes, thus promoting their labor rights in a way that formal unions do for their members in the formal sector. By organizing informal workers, SEWA is helping to ensure that their labor rights are respected and realized, providing them the opportunity to improve their status both within their communities and in the broader labor market. Women in the informal economy are often the backbone of their communities, says Chen. When you empower them, such as through access to green technologies, you're not just helping individual women, you're laying the foundation for a more sustainable and equitable future for communities and economies. We learned from those mistakes. But for those looking to replicate SEWA's model elsewhere, for salt farmers, informal sector workers, women or otherwise, there are a number of key lessons to bear in mind. Lessons SEWA and its partners learned the hard way. The main initial hurdles to getting the project off the ground were the high upfront capital cost of the solar infrastructure and the women's lack of access to traditional credit to finance it. We knew the technology would change lives, but without financing, it wasn't going to happen, recalls Dave. The women didn't have the collateral to get loans from commercial banks. To overcome this issue, SEWA and IFC designed a worker cooperative model, complemented by a risk-mitigating blended finance instrument where the women collectively pooled their resources to fund the solar infrastructure, bypassing the need for individual loans and sharing the financial burden, but also giving the women ownership over the solar systems. The innovation in SEWA's financing model lies in its ability to harness the power of community and collective ownership, says Quatra. But crucial to convincing the banks to lend to these previously unbankable families was SEWA's role in providing KYC, Know Your Customer, documents for the women and aggregating demand, as well as customizing repayment schedules to match the women's income patterns, according to Quatra. Another problem at the start was the regulatory and policy landscape within India. When the program was being set up, there were energy policies and subsidies available to renewable energy projects, but not for small-scale, community-owned ones like SEWA's. We were pushing a boulder uphill, says Dave. The policies were designed for large corporations, not for small cooperatives like ours. But we weren't going to let bureaucracy stand in the way. To solve for this, SEWA and NRDC spent over a year advocating to government agencies, including the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, MNRE, and local energy authorities, to include community-owned solar projects into the renewable subsidy scheme, and then to permit the solar park to connect to the national grid. Policy changes don't happen overnight, says Quatra. But SEWA's ability to advocate for small producers shows the importance of centering worker-led initiatives in energy policy. This can be a game changer for renewable energy access, especially for those who need it most. Then there was the lack of technical expertise among the women, none of whom had worked with anything remotely akin to solar technology before. As a result, the training programs were designed to be hands-on and accessible, allowing workers to build their technical capacity from the ground up. SEWA also included a mentorship model where trained technicians helped guide new learners. Over time, this approach fostered a culture of self-sufficiency, with workers gaining confidence in their ability to manage the technology. When we first installed the panels, Nothing worked right. There were so many mistakes and frustrations, recalls Payal. But the training made all the difference. We learned from those mistakes, and now I'm confident in my ability to maintain the system without help. But probably the most difficult challenge that the project had to overcome was building sufficient trust among the Agaria community. The Agarias have long been a marginalized community within the region, even being labeled a criminal tribe by the British colonial authorities, and are distrustful of outsiders as a result. So, when SEWA asked to take away the women of the families, who are traditionally considered under the protection of the men, to some mysterious education program, many miles away, there was naturally considerable skepticism among the community. Building the trust with the community to allow the women to leave their villages and go train elsewhere was a huge challenge, recalls Bagai. The first 2 years of the program were a tough slog. Bagai and others understood that trust had to be earned. Rather than rushing into large-scale implementation, they took a gradual approach. They started with pilot projects, which allowed the workers to experience the benefits of solar technology firsthand. And importantly, they also allowed the Agaria men to attend any of the training, workshops, or meetings so that they could see the women were safe and learning important skills. And slowly, success stories and enthusiasm for the training began to spread organically throughout the community, and that word of mouth built an inexorable momentum behind the program. Once we saw the difference it made in our lives, we told our neighbors. It wasn't just the leaders. Every worker became an ambassador, says Sanya. On the whole, there is a simple set of instructions for anyone looking to replicate SEWA's model. Cultivate trust among the local community and work with its members to co-create a solution to their stated problems. Build local evidence that the solution works in your specific context. Secure access to subsidies or financing mechanisms. Ensure financial inclusion through organizations that can provide intermediation between banks and communities. Develop local capacity by investing in people who can persistently work on the project over time, and combine effective technology with patient organizations, financial intermediation, and enabling government policies. Once a concept is proven and people see the financial benefits, subsidies can be gradually reduced. My only worry about scaling the program elsewhere is that it takes time and dedication from all involved. And what other organization in the world fosters as much loyalty and commitment from its members as SEWA does, warns Quatra. That's been so critical to the success of all of this. Grand plans. Luckily, SEWA shows no sign slowing down. Looking ahead, it plans to expand the program to 10,000 salt pan workers across Gujarat over the next 5 years, and then subsequently across all of India. We want to extend this transformation to all India's salt pan workers and to other sectors like farming and waste recycling, says Nanavaty. Our goal is to create a larger, more inclusive cooperative model that empowers women to take control of their energy sources and their futures. To help achieve this, SEWA is advocating to the government to include women in the informal sector in its official Just Transition policy, and also to set a minimum price for salt, as it does in other formal agricultural sectors. The organization is also looking to greatly expand its use of carbon credits. UNEP is also currently in discussions with Renew to help scale up the salt program in India, according to Bagai, first in the Ran of Kutch and then in 2 other states, he says. We are also looking to try it in 2 non-salt sectors in 2 other states. The main challenge facing these grand plans, according to Nanavaty, is climate change itself. Increasing heat waves, unseasonal rain, and climate disasters are making it more difficult to harvest the salt consistently in the salt pans and is undermining the business model, she says. But SEWA has already started integrating the model into its other development programs. Chief among those is its Hariyali Gram program. In partnership with NRDC and India's MNRE, the project aims to provide a comprehensive suite of climate solutions for small-scale farmers and rural communities, including solar-powered irrigation, LED bulbs for lighting, energy-efficient fans for thermal comfort, biogas plants for clean cooking, cool roofs to reduce heat stress in houses, precision irrigation systems to reduce water usage, and solar trap lights and solar fodder systems to improve farm productivity. It's about creating the model village of the future, says Quatra. As well as the energy efficiency and solar technician training, the women are trained in sustainable agriculture practices, increasing productivity and financial security. The program is currently being implemented in 100 villages across several states. Similarly, in 2021, SEWA used its salt farmer model to launch a program to support India's 2.5 million waste pickers with solar-powered equipment to sort and process waste more efficiently, reducing the environmental impact of the waste picking process and improving workers' conditions. On its own accord, Renew is now expanding its solar training program to other parts of the country. The company has started a similar program to train coal workers as solar technicians, having already trained 100 women, and is now developing new programs for other underserved groups, such as women fishers. We are aiming to train 2,000 women in the next 2 years, and we won't stop until we've green-skilled at least 50% of the country, adds Sinha. The success of the Salt Farmer program is also garnering admirers abroad, with various international organizations, NGOs, and philanthropies now looking to use the model to support informal sector workers in other low-income countries. In 2020, SEWA was selected as a partner in the Just Energy Transition Initiative by the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, which promotes equitable and sustainable energy transitions in vulnerable regions. The collaboration aims to provide access to clean energy for informal sector workers globally, using SEWA's cooperative model as a foundational strategy for empowering women and reducing reliance on fossil fuels. And after Hillary Clinton visited Gujarat's salt pans in 2023, the Clinton Foundation announced the $50 million Global Resilience Fund to scale the SEWA model to help women in other low-income countries fight climate change. The fund aims to empower women and build their climate resilience by enabling access to affordable and innovative financing solutions to adopt adaptation and mitigation solutions, as well as enabling women's inclusion in formal financial systems. It's at a feasibility study right now, and we expect a pilot this year sometime, says Sharma. SEWA is also in talks with the International Solar Alliance, with the aim of scaling out the solar entrepreneur model to informal sector workers across Africa. We are seeing a growing interest in SEWA's model because it is a bottom-up, worker-driven approach that has proven to be both economically viable and socially transformative, says Quatra. This is a model that can be adapted to different contexts, whether it's for salt workers in Gujarat, farmers in Africa, or women in Southeast Asia. There are, however, potential unintended consequences to consider when encouraging the increased use of the model. It is worth keeping an eye on the increasing levels of water use and solar e-waste that could come from scaling programs like this, warns Chaudhary. It could prove a problem down the line, and there needs to be a plan for sustainable use and recycling, as that's not really being considered in Global South energy transitions right now. Indeed, there is no such thing as a silver bullet in the world's Sisyphean search for just transitions to net zero emissions. Nonetheless, the success of SEWA's Salt Pan Worker program does demonstrate the power of collective action and cooperative ownership in scaling renewable energy initiatives, not only allowing workers to own their energy sources, but also providing a platform for women to take leadership roles within their communities. And at its heart, SEWA's model proves that clean energy, access, and gender empowerment can go hand in hand. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, it's a human rights issue. A just transition means recognizing and removing the barriers that prevent the most vulnerable from participating in the solutions, concludes Robinson. SEWA's model shows the power of the feminine, non-hierarchical, practical, collaborative, united. But importantly, it's women-led. But it's not just for women. Society as a whole benefits. So, tonight, as you reach for the salt shaker on your dinner table, spare a thought for the journey this humble commodity has taken to reach you. This unassuming staple of quotidian life carries with it the invisible labor of countless workers who have toiled in some of the planet's harshest working conditions. But for some of these workers out in the remote salt pans of Gujarat, a transformation is underway, one that brings hope not just to the world's informal sector workers and their communities, but also to the global fight against climate change. Before, I felt like a prisoner to the salt pans and the debt I owed, says Manguben. Now I feel free. Free from pollution, free from debt. I'm part of something bigger, something that can change the world.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Voices, which is brought to you from the Institute for Human Rights and Business. Please remember to share and follow this podcast. That way you'll never miss an episode. And if you'd like to find out more about the work we all do at IHRB, then head to ihrb.org.